Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Small Business Show. I'm your host, Swire. Today, I'm very happy to have Jason Cercone. He's the founder and podcast guest trainer from Cercone Consulting. I'm going to have a lot of questions to Jason because this is one of my favorite topic at the meantime is guesting on other people's podcasts. You think that, you run the Small Business Show, but why do you still go to guest on other people's podcasts? I'll actually ask Jason that question and have him answer it. Before that, welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks for having me, Swire. Great to be here with you today.
For a listener who might not yet be familiar with your work and what you do at Cercone Consulting, can you tell us a little bit about what you do from your day to day?
Absolutely. I have to correct you. It's actually Cercone Consulting, but that's
Okay.
okay because I've heard that name said hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm actually thinking of changing it just to make it all work out for everybody,
All
but
right. Sorry about that.
no problem at all. No. So basically what I do is I focus on podcast guest marketing and optimization. And I've been a podcaster for 7 years and really discovered that people can use some assistance when it comes to getting the most from whether they're starting their own show or from looking to build their brand as a podcast guest. So, what I decided to do is really take it back to ground zero, develop a training program that people can utilize to get the fundamentals of how to be a good guest, and then ultimately take those fundamentals and put them to work in a campaign that allows them to see success from each and every interview they do. I feel like there's so much that can be gained from this platform, but if you don't follow a strategy, then you're really not going to experience all of that success. Many people think it's all about just turning on a microphone and talking, but that's really just like step one, maybe even before step one. There's a process that you can follow that's going to allow you to accomplish a lot of things. And you can get to a point where you're monetizing your interviews before they go live. You're bringing in new partnerships before your interview goes live. And then once your interview's out there, if you do it the right way, you can really reap some serious rewards by impacting the audience and having them come into your world to see what you're all about. So, what I do is help people get the most from their podcast experience on a daily basis.
So let's break it all down. I'm going to go through actually step by step. So the first step will be for listener who have not thought of the concept before. Why do you want to be a guest on other people's podcasts?
The biggest reason I see is the fact that podcasts are the ultimate platform for telling a good story. And in today's world, the brands that are really standing out are the ones that are being truly authentic and going deep within that story that they've built. And that's what's put their brand on the map. When you're able to go to that extreme and then tell that story in a compelling fashion, people start to gravitate towards you. If you go on a podcast that is related to your mission and your message, and it's in your niche, however you want to say that, that's going to put you in a great position to establish authority and showcase that you really are a quality resource that listeners can turn to. The podcast medium is continuing to grow and gain popularity and evolve, and more listeners are coming in. More big brands are starting to advertise, and it just keeps the forward momentum of the podcast platform going in the direction we want to see it go. So if you find shows that are in your space and you give an impactful interview, you put yourself in a position to where that interview could be found months, even years after it goes live, because most podcasts are built on the foundation of evergreen content. So when people find your message or hear your message years down the road, they may look you up. And so that one piece of content could be impactful for years and ultimately serve you the way you need it to. You can't do that on a lot of other platforms. So standing out in the podcast space really puts you in a good spot that you can win and find some great success.
Yeah, I love that, Jason. I want to share a personal example because I've been on a number of podcasts, and one of the most frequently asked questions, obviously based on my background, is what is the best promotional product that you would suggest? So I listened to the episode that I did, the first few episodes that I did, and then from the recent episodes that I'm doing I'm actually, like you said, able to create story around what I was going to say. I'm actually getting better on my communication skills. How am I going to answer these questions? Because you might think that you know the answer for all your businesses, but until you actually get asked, especially you're recording and we're doing live right now, all the pressure, then you might say something wrong. You might say, "Is this me? I don't sound like that." So I think that's a humbling experience every single time when I have to listen back to myself.
And that's one of the big things I recommend to everybody, because a lot of people have this build up in their mind that they don't want to listen to their own voice. And I don't like how I sound, so I'm not going to go back and listen. And I tell everybody, get that out of your head right now, because you're the only one thinking it. No one else is thinking that about your voice. They're there for your message. You need to hear how you sound and how you project your voice and how confidently you speak in order to get better at it. So when you go on the next interview, you do a little bit better, and the next interview, and so on and so on. And every time you do a great guest appearance, your presentation, your storytelling, your ability to captivate the audience just keeps improving. But if you don't listen to yourself and discover some of the vocal quirks that you might have, or some of the things that may be not relaying the message that you want to relay, then you can't make those improvements. So yeah, if you're hung up on the fact that you don't like your voice, get that out of your head now. Listen to yourself and make the improvements you need to.
I think especially when actually now client is asking me the same question, because I've been rehearsed, practice so many times, it comes really natural. Even for the same pitch that I'm going to do for my client in sales, I have 10 different stories that I could tell. So I think you're
Mhm.
right. It gets easier because when I go on to shows, I make notes. So those same notes, I can use it on when I'm going on a sales call. Same situation, but then now it's just you're on the clock. You're on, really doing a business. It's the same way. So I think it does. I do like the experience, and I do like the method that's going through the thinking process, and I think I'm getting better on telling story to my client.
You are. Without even hearing it, I guarantee you are, because as you tell it, it just starts to flow more naturally. From my personal experience, I can say that as I worked on developing my voice, I did it in the podcast platform first, but video was always something that threw me off. But the more I practiced enunciating and really developing my voice for podcasting, I was a little surprised how quickly that translated over to video. So now the videos that I'm making for my YouTube channel are much more compelling and much more to the point. And I feel that the confidence that I gained in this space was easily applicable to that area. So you can take the voice that you develop in the podcast platform, when in essence no one's really seeing you, it's more audio. I know that's probably stepping on what we're doing here with a live video, but if you want to be a public speaker, or if you're doing presentations at work, all of this works hand in hand. So if you can develop that confidence in one space, it'll shift over to the other pretty easily.
Mhm. So we got over the why, right? It's very compelling reason why we should all consider doing a guest podcast. Should we do like 100 guesting posts, or should we go on the best type of podcast that is related to our business? What are your thoughts?
It's always quality over quantity. Now you can do 100. There's nothing against that, but make sure they're all related to your space. If you only have a couple podcasts that are in your space, and you mix that up with 98 others that just don't relate to your mission, to your message, to your overall goals and what you want to accomplish, then you're just wasting your time. There's some crossover appeal that could happen, but for the most part, that audience is not listening to, like, if you're in marketing, for example, if you were to go on a bass fishing podcast, you may catch a couple bass fishers that also work in marketing full time, but for the most part, that audience is tuned in because they want to hear content about bass fishing. Your message is going to be much better received if you find shows that are related to your field, which would be marketing in that case. So
Mm.
quality all the way in that respect. And I know a lot of people get hung up on the size of the audience, thinking that it's got to be massive in order for a real impact to be made. Could not be further from the truth. In reality, when you go on podcasts that are more tightly defined, it could be a smaller audience of 100 to 200 people, But if all of those people are there for a reason and you can make an impact on even a small percentage of that audience and bring them into your circle, potentially having the opportunity to take them from website visitor to qualified lead to customer and then loyal brand advocate as you nurture them through your process, you can make much more hay talking to a smaller audience that's there for your message versus a big audience that's more broad and not as tightly defined. So across the board, it's always quality over quantity.
Okay. So what do we say, or what is the brand message that we should put it through the podcasting? I think I have guests and I've talked to people before where obviously we at the end we have our product and services that we want to promote on the show. Sometimes I do get people come onto the website, they're just selling their stuff, right? All the way through. So is that something that you would recommend, or what should be the message when we go on podcast, and what kind of content should we be providing?
You hit the most beautiful aspect of the podcasting platform is you don't need to sell in order to sell. And what I mean by that is the podcasting platform is not designed for you to be partaking in an infomercial. If you would have brought me on your show, Swire, and I would have sat here and just sold on why people need to work with me, people would have tuned out on that pretty quickly and gotten very bored. The objective when you're appearing on any podcast is to provide value and speak to the audience in a way that it's relatable. You're not going over and above with jargon and ultimately making someone listening going, this doesn't sound like something I want to listen to until the very end, because all this person is doing is selling to me. So when you go on a podcast, it's better to just put yourself in a position to where you provide some value and you help solve problems through the conversation that you're having. More than likely, as questions are thrown your way, you're going to have an opportunity to promote yourself as the resource that can help them solve the problems they may be having. Podcasters are smart. They know what their audience is after, so they're going to build content that serves that audience. Obviously, they see something in you as the guest, or else they wouldn't have invited you on. So now that you're there, use that time to showcase that you really know what you're talking about and you can provide value. If someone is truly impacted by what you have to say, they're going to follow up with you later. And that's all done through the call to action. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point too. But when they follow up with you, that's your opportunity to then continue providing value and letting them get to know who you are and why you'd be a good partner to work with. People are
Yep.
very intentional about how they buy these days. So now they're going to look at who they're buying from. And if you do your part to showcase how you can work with them, they're going to buy from you when the time is right.
I think doing your homework and actually connect with the host prior, I think is a very important aspect, because a lot of guests will just go on to a show up and thought that, they could give a good, compelling story, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would like to do, and when I do more episodes, I really wanted to find out who the audience really was behind the podcast host network. So I actually create and craft my story differently, because if I know that there are bigger audience, or they have a different demographics, so then I actually change my story, my examples, right? People like to hear third party example. Instead of selling them that you should buy certain product, I actually now use an example. So these are how people are able to create, and then they're getting a better result. And also, the more that I prepare, or I even ask them, what kind of question would you like to ask me, so I could study up on it. So I think by doing my homework, my performance and my presentation are actually much better. So I think if you want to craft your brand message, that's fine. But then you should think about different ways to create it so it doesn't sound salesy.
Exactly. And I think a great add on to doing all of that is when you do your job and you provide value to the audience, and that helps the podcaster create something that's going to be a very epic part of their portfolio and they're proud of it, they're going to sell you themselves. They're going to tell their audience why you need to be in business with Swire, because Swire has all the goods and all the answers, because the whole reason of bringing you on the show was to help create engaging content. When they have engaging content, that helps their audience grow because people listening will start to recommend that content. So that makes them happy. So of course they're going to do their part to go over and above and tell their audience why you're the person they should work with. So again, another way to sell without selling.
Yeah, so I think before we go deeper, first of all, is how do we pitch a show? Like, what are some of the ways that we can connect with podcast hosts and find out more about if they want us to even be on the show?
You're using that dirty word pitch. I gotta nip that in the bud. No, it's definitely called that in most circles. I prefer the word presentation. I know I've spoke with some other people that work in this space that you pitch a baseball. If you're a brewer, you pitch yeast as you're making beer. When you present a person, you present that person. You don't pitch that person. That again, that's semantics. But when it comes to presenting yourself to a good podcast, it's all about finding the right ones for your brand that fit what you do and what you want to accomplish. So there's a little bit of research involved with that. So you have to find a service. If you don't, I mean, you could go as far as just type in best whatever your industry is podcasts on Google and get some good responses and some good returns on that search. Google is doing a great job indexing podcast content these days. So that's going to help. You can go to an app like Podchaser or Apple Podcasts or Amazon or Spotify, and wherever you're listening to podcasts, you can search for certain shows in your genre and find shows that may be worth reaching out to. And that's the beginning part of it. So you have to find a way to reach out to us. There's also, I'll give a plug for a service called Podmatch. That was actually the platform that brought you and I together, Swire. I swear by Podmatch. That's a phenomenal service. So once you find shows that you feel may be worth reaching out to, then you've got to do a little bit deeper. Now, there are some people that might just say, okay, this looks like it's in my space. I'm going to reach out. I challenge everyone to go a couple layers deeper to make sure that it truly is a show that's going to be impactful for what you want to achieve. So take a look at the cover art. Take a look at the title of the shows and the description. Is there creativity there? Take a look at if they're still producing content. That'll save you a lot of time because there are some shows that have pod faded, meaning they're no longer producing new content. If they're not active, then there's no point in wasting your time reaching out to them. So you can bypass those shows rather quickly. But once you see if they have a nice aesthetic appeal, meaning their cover art is creative and their show titles are creative and they have show notes that are descriptive but not lengthy blog posts, you can get a feel for if the content makes sense before you click on it to listen. I look at ratings and reviews just to see what people are saying. If there's a trend in one direction or the other, if it's bad, then if everybody was saying the same thing in a negative way, I might bypass that show. But that's typically not what you see when you do that. But I like to get a feel for what the audience is experiencing when they listen to that show. Then I look outside the podcast and I see if they have a website. I see what their social media presence is like. I look at all of these items because if I'm on this show as a guest, I want to know how I'm going to fit in to this little community that they've created. How are they going to promote my interview with them when it goes live? If they have a website, if they have a social media presence, if they have an email newsletter, whatever they have, it's good to know up front what you're getting involved with. And then finally, I'll listen to the show and discover what it sounds like. And mainly I'm looking for sound quality and just overall good conversation. And you don't have to listen to the entire episode, but listen to enough of it to get a true feel of whether you feel it makes sense for you. And then comes the actual presentation where you reach out to them. And this should be done in a very quality way. It should not just be done in, hey, I found your podcast. Would you like to have me as a guest? You should actually be reaching out with full value in mind from the very start. Mention content that you listened to and how it impacted you. You know, Sam, I was just listening to episode 37 where you had Jill on the show and you were talking about X, Y, and Z. I got to tell you, that message was incredibly impactful. And I work with clients that work in that space every day. So I've actually told a couple of them about what I heard and how it impacted me and told them to listen to this. If you're looking for guests right now, I'd love to be a part of your show. And I feel I could come on and we could make some great content together talking about X, Y, and Z. So from the start, you're presenting yourself from a position of value versus someone that's just spraying and praying and reaching to every single podcast that's out there, hoping they get a response from a couple so they can make a guest appearance. You put yourself in a much better position if you present yourself or pitch yourself in a valuable way and showcase immediately that you're a good resource for them.
Yeah, a lot of good information there, Jason. Especially when I know that the guests themselves are have their things together. I'm sure that you agree that if I know that the guest has a press kit, they have
Mm-hmm.
audio sample for me,
Mm-hmm.
they already send me the headshots. I know that these are people who have been through the podcast, and I think in the beginning days for the small business show, I actually had to go really hard to find people to get there, and I would say it's a hit and miss. Sometimes I will get a really good guest for the show. However, they actually don't have the equipment set up. And my background was a recording engineer. I do pay really much focus on the quality of sound. And then if you compare with a lot of podcasts to, let's say, something that, let's say a Conan O'Brien podcast, I think is one of the best sounding podcasts out there. The level changed. And then when you put on your earbuds, you might not be able to tell, oh, this is a good quality mic or this is a good sounding podcast, but then you hear that something is off, right? Maybe you listen to 10 seconds, it's really good content, but you just can't listen to it. It sounds not good,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So I think don't want to skip a step, and don't want to get too deep into it. What type of equipment and what kind of expense should we expect, assuming that we don't have that already?
I think the greatest thing about this is that you can get quality equipment that makes your voice sound very professional, but you don't have to break the bank to do it. And it really depends on how much you're looking to be a part of this. Like, podcasters, one of the big things that will hang them up in getting started is they think they have to have state of the art equipment. In reality, you could start a podcast with your smartphone without a microphone and just record your voice and project it. It's that easy if you really were committed to starting a podcast. What I recommend to everybody when they're starting a podcast is to figure out if you really love this medium and you're going to stay committed to it. Don't spend thousands of dollars on equipment to find out 3 or 4 episodes in that this is a lot of work and this is way more work than I thought it was, and I'm done. And now you can try to offload that equipment at a discount, or it's just going to collect dust in your closet. I recommend the same thing as a guest. If you know this is going to be one of the primary objectives in your marketing strategy, invest in a microphone. I recommend the Shure products, Shure. Their microphones are top of the line. I have a Shure MV7. It was the best $250 that I've ever spent on podcasting equipment. But you can find microphones that are less expensive than that. But again, you have to think about your objectives here. If you're going to be going on a few interviews a week, spend a little money and get something that's going to make your voice sound great. The podcasters that you're collaborating with are going to thank you for it. And again, evergreen content, right? This is content that's going to be out there for years. You're going to thank yourself for sounding your best when this podcast is still bringing you results 5 years down the road. And you can absolutely see a difference from someone that shows up with a microphone of some sort versus someone that's just using their internal microphone. It sounds very, very muffled. It's just not the same quality. And again, you're showing up to bring value. So that's something that doesn't just relate to your story. The value lies in how you project that story. And having a good microphone is going to help you do that.
Especially even though we are back to somewhat in-person meeting, I think online meetings, Zoom meetings are here to stay. You can use the same equipment that you might have purchased, a microphone or a better camera, better light, when you go to a business meeting, right?
Yep.
I use the same equipment that I'm using to do the podcast right now to do a meeting. Sometimes people get impressed, wow, you got good light, you sound really good.
Right.
Then imagine if you're in a business situation, you were communicating with your client, they're impressed by your overall presentation. Before, when we need to go to in-person meeting, you got to buy some nicer dress, shoes, or maybe a nice tie, a purse,
Yep.
whatever that might be. Same could mean, invest in the personal equipment where you can use actually every single day if you're still doing a lot of online meeting. So it never hurts to be looking better, sounding better, and it's the same principle for being a guest.
Isn't it funny how we will skimp when it comes to a $200 microphone that's going to absolutely help our voice project, but we didn't think about like our college degrees or a brand new suit or the clothing that we're going to wear. I feel like we're willing to throw tons of money at things like that without a second thought. But when it comes to something small like this, I don't know if I'm going to pull the trigger on this. But like I said, I mean, I recommend this MV7 from Shure over any microphone I've ever used. And they have a couple more that are a little bit higher in price. But what I like about this mic is that it gives me the ability to plug in through my USB. And if you're looking to just be a podcast guest, or even if you want to start a show, you could do it this way. You don't have to worry about having a soundboard or a mixer or a digital interface where you have to fiddle with the knobs. This just makes you sound really good. And that's the name of the game in this space.
Yeah, you does sound good, and I think I actually looked at that microphone. It's easy, right? When you're going on a Zoom meeting, all you have to do is plug in that USB, and you're good to go. You just put it on your desk, and then your quality, it's just so much better. I can't tell you how many times that I've been onto a webinar or having a business meeting. Then whenever that a person talk, you cover your ears because it I don't know what happens going on, and then you see echo and looping on.
Yep.
That's not how you wanted to present yourself professionally, especially
No, sir.
if you are going on a call. So we dress to impress, and now you have to look and sound to impress.
That's right. Absolutely right.
So what happens after you appear on the podcast? You said that there might be immediate benefits, and also want to get into how would you recommend that we've been on a good podcast? We have an engaging conversation. I thought I did okay. So how do we actually promote and benefit from the episode?
This is where a lot of people fall short of, because I know I've talked to other podcasters that they've expressed that people just don't get as excited as they seem to have been when they did the interview. And a lot of reasons come up for that. Some people just go on every podcast they can when they work the circuit, and maybe they had 4 or 5 interviews come out at once. So their job's done. They're not going to promote it. That's one reason why that doesn't get shared. But ultimately, I think one of the biggest reasons is they did this interview months ago, and the level of excitement has waned a bit for them. So what I tell everyone, if you're going to be a guest, and if you promise that podcaster up front that you're going to share that content, follow through. And you should be happy to follow through, because this is content that, other than the actual contribution you made with your guest appearance, they put everything else together for you. And in my training program, we talk about things that you can do outside of just that interview to keep the value up. But ultimately, this was evergreen content that someone else took the time to build, and you're the star in that respect. You're in the guest seat with a very bright spotlight shined on you. Share that with your community. You should be proud to share that with your community. This is another way that you can showcase that your reputation is growing and you truly know what you're talking about. More people are going to see that. More shows you do, they're going to say, wow, Swire really knows his stuff. Look, they've got him on here, and I just heard him on this show last week. This is all great. And they buy into you a little bit more every time they hear you go on a show and showcase your expertise. So whatever they put out, and a lot of podcasters will supply you with assets that they design. Here's some imagery you can share. Here's some short form video clips that I put together. Here's the show notes in a blog post. There's a number of things that they might put together, but you could go so far as to ask them, when everything is done with the interview, and if you get a chance today, can you send me over the raw file? I'm going to clip a couple videos of my own. I've never had a podcaster say no to that. And that's another way that you can clip a couple videos, build it into a reel for Instagram, put it on a YouTube short, just something that gets people excited to say, maybe I want to check out this podcast and listen to the whole thing so I can get more value from this person. If you leave these opportunities on the table, you're costing yourself chances to really make a bigger impact with the community that you've already built. And once you build that community, or build that impact with that community, of course, you want them to take that next step and become a customer. Some people will take longer to do that, but the more you keep putting value in front of them, it could bring them closer to where you want them to be. And again, like I said, somebody else did this work for you. Podcast production is not easy. So if someone else is willing to bring you on the show and then do all that great work for you, take a few minutes to tell the world how proud you are to be on that show.
I definitely going to clip this clip, what you just said, and I'll put it on my podcast, before
the irony, right?
That's good. Before you hop on, you listen to a professional, what it said, it is about you. And you're right. I spend a lot of time. I do all the editing myself, and I know what I have to go through and, spend 2-3 times the amount of the actual episode just to edit it, to make it sound right. And you don't get good quality without work to it. So a lot of planning, a lot of actually checking out with schedule, but, just want to provide good conversation, and then also finding a good guest that I think the listener will resonate with, because I don't want to just have everybody on to just pitch and not relevant information to the audience. And that's where you lose the audience. And you have to keep in mind that podcaster view their podcast as the baby. So you don't want to go and mess up other people baby. They get mad, and we talk to each other, right? So if you are thinking about this is the right platform for you, you get recommendation from the podcast host. We all know each other. So if we are impressed by a guest, then you can actually getting a easier time to be booked on more quality podcasts. If people actually say, they are good guests. They have good mic. They do their homework. Very good presentation. You should also talk to that person too.
That's one of the big things that I recommend with everybody. Once the interview concludes, ask if you know anybody else that has a good show that they're looking for a quality guest. If you feel I'd be a good fit, would you mind making an introduction for me? And a lot of times, if the podcaster has someone on the front of their mind that like they're thinking immediately, yeah, if you were good here, you'd be great here. They're happy to make that introduction for you because they're friends with that podcaster and they know the work that's involved with making a show really get over with the audience. They're going to recommend you as a guest that can help them do that. And what I always say is make it a two-way street, because if you have a colleague or somebody that that's doing podcast guest appearances that would be an impactful guest for the show you just interviewed with, recommend them. Hey, I've got a colleague that I can introduce you to. I think they'd be a great guest for you. If you want, I'll make that introduction happen. This is a great way to work smarter, not harder, because every interview you do, you have the opportunity to double the capacity of the interviews that you do. And you want to keep yourself in the best graces of those hosts. So if you're bringing them another quality guest, of course they're going to thank you. And of course they're going to help you sell harder or get sold harder to their audience, because again, you have their interest at heart. It's not just all about you. It's about how everybody that's involved with the process is going to succeed.
Yeah, I also love the opportunities that I love networking, right? So with the podcast, even as a guest experience, I'm able to reach out shows that are outside of the United States. I make a good contact with them. And actually, I think I'm building my business for, if you do a multinational type business, I think that's actually good opportunity. So maybe you're not known outside of the United States, and you can actually go to basically any country in the world who speaks English. Then you can actually build your brand outside the country. So maybe you really have a niche, right? You really have something that really narrowly focus. Open up to the world and let the world knows about your expertise. Think about how that would actually benefits to your brand. Or if you really developing, you want the really big growth, you want to go worldwide, I would suggest a good platform to do it.
I tell everybody that's starting a podcast that you have to look far beyond download numbers, especially at the very beginning. If you're just getting a podcast started, it's going to take some time to establish your audience. And I feel a lot of podcasters walk away from their show far too soon because they don't see massive growth right from the start. And we know that's not how it works. It takes time to truly build content that's going to continue to impact the audience on a consistent basis to where they're recommending others to listen to the show. And then when they recommend people, then those people recommend. And so your audience continues to grow in that respect, but that takes time. if you start looking at your podcast production as a strong networking tool, you'll never want to quit because you're getting to have high level conversations with people that are just as passionate about your area of expertise as you are. I've said this about my show 100 times. I started Evolution of Brand as a way to help people get good brand building strategies that they can apply to their practices, but also get inspirational stories from the entrepreneurs and professionals that I've brought on to converse with me. And as the show has evolved and grown, I've been like, if no one is listening to this and it's just me, that's okay. Because I just learned so much from the conversation that I got to have with every individual that's come on. I've learned something from. And I had the benefit of going through the editing process and putting together this final product. So I usually listen to the show 2 or 3 times before it's ever live. Every time I do that, I pick out something new. That's incredibly powerful. And that's a great way as a podcaster to stay loyal to your production. And that will make you stay loyal to the audience you've already built. So get beyond download numbers and focus on the people that have shown up and said, you're killing it. We love this. Keep doing it. And then as you do that and just it'll keep you passionate about what you're doing. It's going to allow you to get better at podcasting. I can say I was terrible my very first podcast 7 years ago. And I feel like I've come a long way, but I stuck with it. And I feel more people are going to make more quality shows if they start to take that mindset into the game with them.
Okay. So Jason, love all the information. So for those of us who are engaged right now, knowing the benefits for being a guest on other people's podcasts, where do we start? How would you suggest that people actually get started? It seems like there's a lot of things doing, and it is there's a lot of things that you have to be aware of. It's not something that you could do in one day. It's a process, right? So, and then how should people reach out to you to learn more about your process and how to make them a great guest for other people's podcasts?
I'd say the best way to get started is visit jasoncercone.com/small business show. And on that page, I have an opt-in form where you can pick up my free podcast guest optimization guide. It's called 10 Tips for Becoming a Valuable, Fully Optimized Podcast Guest. And these tips are really just the foundation. And I drop some good info about what you need to really be thinking about if you want to be a positive, value-driven podcast guest. And to me, what it really starts with is optimization. I mentioned when we first started talking, Swire, a lot of people think this is just turning on a microphone and talking. There's much more to it. And if you go into your very first interview optimized, and this is what I focus on working with everybody with it, let's talk about your goals, your expectations. Let's set you up for success in all facets of this process before you ever go on an interview. That way, when you get started, you're confident in your story. You have a good call to action. And before that ever happens, you had a good presentation that showcased your value right from the start so you could get that guest appearance. So it all starts with pick up that guide, learn more about what podcast guest marketing and podcast guest optimization are all about. And when you pick up that guide, you'll be on my website. So there's plenty of ways that you can connect with me, but it all starts there. And then once you get through that, you'll see the next step in the process.
I'll definitely include that link in the show notes. And Jason, I think this is, at the end, it's your time, right? But then I think podcast guestings actually helped me in a number of ways. Now, my presentation to my clients are better. The number of stories that are available to me are better. And then some podcast hosts do ask me like tough questions. Because in my field, they will ask me to debate internally about digital marketing versus promotional product. Now I know 10 different ways to answer it. And it doesn't sound that I'm defending myself, but to create more thinking process for people. So I do notice that I'm getting better.
Yeah.
and I think this is something that I truly passionate to do, because I think the more people that I could talk to, they have their own questions the host want to ask me. So I'm able to know more of different sides of the company, different industries, different background, really. And then, so for my own business in business development, I think it's been really, really helpful.
The great thing about this approach is that it can benefit you no matter what space you're involved in. And again, what it comes down to is that optimization process of truly understanding what you can get from the podcast platform as a valuable guest. But once you get in the trenches and you start talking with other podcasters and your appearances start to get out into the wild, there's so many things that come from it that are positive, from building that authority, from growing your know, like, and trust factor, from getting to network with other people that are passionate about what you do. And one of the big things that we didn't really talk about today, that is to me, I call it the unsung hero of podcast guest marketing, is the SEO benefits that are involved. If you provide a good call to action that points people back to your website, every time that link gets posted on another website that has high authority, that's triggering Google to say, wow, this is a high authority website too. So your visibility starts to increase in organic search. So that's huge. So it's another feather in the cap for anybody that's using the podcast platform. And I know that one doesn't really get talked about, but it's enormous. And if you're looking to increase visibility, you can't go wrong in that respect.
Yeah, I think that you're right. Recently we're working with a marketing agency right now, and normally they struggle with what to post for their client. But then I just mentioned I've been doing a website, a podcast. It's on our website, and I also guest on other people's podcasts, and so happy, right? I create so many contents for them. They all the schedule posts are lined up. So if you're thinking about creating more content for your website as a blog, as a podcast, so definitely you could fill up a lot of spaces and showcase a lot of your keywords there, right? You get backlinks, you get keywords. So if we get into digital marketing, these are the buzzword that everyone uses.
That's right. Absolutely. No, like I said, like we talked about a lot of it today, and the benefits that come from a good, well curated guest marketing campaign can serve your brand for years. So it's something I highly recommend, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anyone that wants to know more about this and is looking to really tackle this and get the most from it. And you schedule a consultation on my website, jasoncercone.com, and we'll make it happen.
So everyone, check out the link in the show notes, and thank you so much for coming on today, Jason.
Swire, thanks for having me. It was a blast.